Hello, everyone, and welcome back to First Pages. Today, we're going to be reading Strange Birds by Cecilia C. Perez, and I'm going to go ahead and read you the blurb. How do strangers become friends? Ophelia Castillo is searching for a story. While her friends leave their boring Florida town for summer camps and family vacations, she braces for zero excitement. Lane DeSanti would like her whole family to kick rocks, especially her parents, who sent her to live with her grandmother for the summer where they finalized their divorce. Astor Douglas has one summer to figure out how to be a kid. She's been homeschooled by her grandfather her whole life, and it's easier for her to make a souffle than a friend. Kat Garcia is hiding a big secret. She's in need of a new troop after she quits the Floras, her local scouts, without her mother knowing. When fate and longing bring the girls together, it isn't love at first sight, but they soon bond over a shared mission to get the Floras to ditch an outdated tradition. In their quest for justice, independence, and an unforgettable summer, the girls form their own troop and find something they didn't know they needed: sisterhood. And I'm going to go ahead and read you the first pages. And there's a quote here that's interesting that the author put in. I never had any friends later on like the ones I had when I was 12. Stephen King. Chapter 1. The pencil Ophelia tapped against her reporter's notebook was part of a set, a last-day school gift from her favorite teacher, Miss Nigley. She'd given them to all the newspaper staffers who were moving on to middle school. Ophelia knew they were nice pencils, not generic 12 for $2 pencils. Each one was topped with a black eraser, and on its natural wood color was a quote by a man named Woody Guthrie. All you can write is what you see. She had asked Miss Nigley what the quote meant, and Miss Nigley had answered in the way teachers do. What do you think it means? Ophelia hoped it didn't mean that all you could write was literally what you saw. Woody Guthrie had obviously never lived in Sabal Palms, Florida. What she saw outside the window of her mother's car on that first Monday morning of summer break was the same thing she saw every Monday morning. There was Donna Amalia from next door wheeling her overflowering blue recycling bin across her driveway. The wheels crunched over gravel as she struggled to drag it. Once at the curb, she opened the lid and pulled out the topmost object. Then she aimed it at Chuco. Chuco was a rooster that had showed up one day after a tropical storm battered their town. He moved into the tree in front of Donna Amalia's house and had never left. Someone on their street, no one remembers who, named him Chuco, and it stuck. Chuco had the prettiest burnt orange feathers, but his handsomeness didn't outweigh his bad habits. The rooster pooped on cars when Donna Amalia had company parked out front, and if that wasn't bad enough, he crowed all day, like his internal alarm clock was out of whack, drawing the wrath of not just Ophelia's neighbors, but of the entire street. As a rinsed-out can of Goya black beans flew through the air, it occurred to Ophelia that the only thing that really changed from week to week was the item Donna Amalia threw at the bird with all the strength her 70-something-year-old arm could muster. The can missed its mark, but startled the rooster, who flew from his perch, squawking angrily as he strutted down the street. Ophelia watched her mom make her way toward the car, purse hanging on her right shoulder, keys in hand. "Dale, Donna Amelia!" Miss Castillo called out. "If you hit that bird, I'll make a roast con gallo for us." "Ha ha!" Ophelia thought. She pulled off her glasses and wiped them on her t-shirt. She didn't need them to see that the two women were now laughing like it was the first time her mom had made that joke. She held her pencil to her nose and inhaled the cedar scent. It smelled like an amazing story. It smelled like the truth. That, she realized, was all she could write. And that what would win the QWERTY Shoals journalism contest. 5 lucky 7th graders from all around the country were picked each year to attend a summer journalism camp in New York City. Winning the contest not only meant being recognized for her writing, it meant going away without her parents and proving to them, once and for all, that she could be responsible and independent. But as she watched Donna Amalia push down the contents of her recycling bin, close the lid, and head back up in her driveway, she saw her QWERTY Shoals dream circling the drain. Ophelia sighed and looked at the blank page. "Let me remind you that you are not to write anything in your little notebook," Miss Castillo said, settling in the driver's seat and glancing in Ophelia's direction. "Nothing you see, nothing you hear." What kinds of things might I see or hear that I shouldn't write about? She wiggled her eyebrows at her mom. Ni una palabra, Ophelia, Miss Castillo warned again. None of your Nancy Drew business. Nancy Drew is a sleuth, Ophelia said. She looks for clues to solve mysteries. I'm a journalist. I look for stories to write. Miss Castillo said. Both sound nosy to me. Ophelia thought about what her mother said. She knew she wanted to be a journalist when she learned about the muckrakers in social studies class. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, journalists like Ida B. Wells, Nellie Bly, and Ida Tarbell exposed corruption. They noticed injustices, and then through their stories forced the world to notice them too. Miss Nigley said that no one really used the term muckraker anymore, that today they called them investigative journalists. Still, Ophelia relished the idea of raking the muck off and exposing things, like raking the tomato sauce off of the meatballs in the school cafeteria and exposing them for the textured vegetable protein balls they really were. Or like the topic of her very first story in second grade, an expose on the three wise men after she caught her parents not Los Reyes Magos leaving gifts for her on January 6th. It made her wonder what else the adults in her life were hiding. Maybe she could be Nancy Drew and Ida B. Wells all in one. She certainly didn't want to be a Lois Lane type of journalist, who didn't even realize that Clark Kent was Superman wearing glasses. But what am I to do? What am I supposed to do all summer, Ma? Ophelia asked, struggling to keep from whining. In books and movies, summer break meant spending your days outside, looking for adventures. Her friend Andrea was flying alone to visit her cousins in California, and then she was going to sleepaway camp. Ophelia, on the other hand, was going to go work with her mom. She squirmed with embarrassment, and wondered how many 12-year-olds had parents as overprotective as hers. She knew kids who were unsupervised after school, and during the summer who went to the movies with friends, not with their parents. When I was a little girl in Cuba, we would make a whole game out of an empty box, Miss Castillo said, proudly. You can help me if you need something to do. I'm going to be very busy with the preparations for the Flores Centennial. Just point me to the nearest box, please, Ophelia said with fake enthusiasm. Bueno, read, be bored, Miss Castillo said. It's not the worst thing in the world. Ophelia stuck the pencil in her mouth and bit down so hard the thin glossy coat over the word can cracked between her teeth. It was as if the pencil had known she was doomed. Being bored, being stuck in an old dusty house all summer, those were the absolute worst things in the world. Ophelia pressed the steely gray lead of her pencil against the page and wrote, Dead Body Found at DeSanti Mansion. Boredom Sought for Questioning, by Ophelia Castillo. Chapter 2. In Lane's memory, the tree house had been a lot higher up in the branches of the old banyan. It was a scary climb when she was little, even with one of her older brothers leading the way and the other following behind. They allowed her up only when their parents insisted, so she never let on that she was scared, no matter how much the ladder wobbled beneath her feet. She squinted out up at the makeshift flagpole and blew a strand of hair out of her sweaty face. Her brother's flag and an old pillowcase with the large D for DeSanti sloppily written in red marker still hung from the pole. Lane noticed a peacock nearby, watching. The way the bird looked at her intently, its head tilted, one eye turned in her direction, made her feel like it knew something about her that she didn't know. She didn't like the feeling. "What you looking at, weirdo?" she asked the bird, before wrapping her fingers around the side of the ladder. She was 12 now. The climb wasn't as high or as scary. She didn't need her brothers. At the top, Lane pulled off her backpack and tossed it into the tree house. She looked around at the familiar space. A hammock made of thick interwoven ropes was strung across one end. A crocheted afghan lay in a ball inside it. She pulled out the afghan. It had once been a bright green and blue, but the colors had faded after years of lying in direct sunlight that came in through the opening in the roof. Lane held her breath and shook it out, watching dust motes swirl and scatter. She hung the afghan over a windowsill to air out. She could see that the bird was still standing there when she left it. She dug out a granola bar from her backpack, broke off a few pieces, and tossed them down to the bird. Her grandmother's property was overrun with peacocks, and she had warned Lane not to feed them. Lane watched the bird scurry away, but not so far it didn't quickly return to investigate what had been dropped. Lane turned back to her work in the treehouse. Besides the hammock, the only other furniture in it was a wall of cubbies, some long and rectangular, others small and square. Most of the cubbies were empty, but a few still held items of her brothers had left behind. A game of checkers, a deck of cards, a box of matches and a flashlight, a deflated football, and a few books whose pages were still stuck together, their covers warped from rain. Everything was covered in a layer of grit. She collected her brother's old things into one cubby. Even if the items were no longer useful, she couldn't throw them away. They were relics of a time when her family was still a family. Lane had her own room in her grandmother's house, but in the tree house she stashed the things that would help her survive the summer. In one cubby she unpacked her paints, brushes, and sketch pad, along with her X-Acto knife, an item that would probably alarm her grandmother if she found it inside. In another cubby she placed a small canvas pouch with her collection of crystals. She had found a box of tiny, battery-operated string lights in the attic, which she now hung around the doorway. When she was younger she loved the treehouse because it reminded her of her favorite picture book about a boy whose family didn't like him building things inside their house. One day he runs away and builds his own house, where he can do as he likes. Soon he's joined by other kids whose families don't like their pets and their hobbies, their dirt and their noise. The boy builds them all houses, and the children create their own village. Lane felt like the boy in the book as she pulled in the flagpole and removed her brother's old pillowcase flag. Instead, in that story, the families all realize how much they miss the children, and the kids realize they miss their families too. They reunite and go home together and live happily ever after. Just like people always do in books, Lane thought. She was glad to have the tree house to herself, a place of her own, away from her family. A place where no one was looking for her. Not her parents, not her brothers, and not her grandmother. Chapter 3. Aster cradled the 6 yellow boxes of microfilm in her arms as she walked to the reference librarian's desk. They felt like baby chicks threatening to hop out and fall to the floor. "Here you go, Miss Falco," she said. "Anything else for today?" Miss Falco asked, relieving Aster of her load. He needs the Miami Herald from February 1st to February 15th, 1909, Aster said, squinting at her grandfather's tidy handwriting on a sheet of legal pad paper. "And I think that's it, but you know my grandpa." Miss Falco nodded before disappearing among the beige microfilm cabinets behind her desk and returned a minute later with a single yellow box. Aster walked back to where her grandfather sat. He spent so much time at the Subalpine Palms Public Library that he had his own microfilm machine. It didn't really belong to him, but it might as well have his name on it, since he was probably one of the last people, besides Miss Falco, who even knew how to use it. It wasn't that her grandpa didn't appreciate new technologies. He wasn't about to turn butter or even make it by shaking cream in a jar like Aster had shown him. And he loved his frozen microwave dinners. He used the old microfilm machine because there were some things new technology still couldn't do. For example, if he wanted to find out what the citrus industry was like in South Florida the year he was born, either Aster knew only because she found his missing birth certificate while helping him look for his also missing Social Security card, he had to go to the library. Sure, he might be able to find some bits and pieces of information online, but for the real meat of it, what her grandpa called primary sources, sometimes the internet wouldn't cut it. Plus, he liked to argue, technology took some of the mystery and wonder out of the world. "Grandpa, we have to go soon," Aster said, looking at the clock on the wall. "Mm-hmm," he responded. She watched the reflection of the microfilm on his glasses as he rewound it. The end of the film reel swooshed between the plates of glass and released, spinning and flapping on its spool, until her grandfather turned the knob to stop it. "All done with this one," he said. He removed the reel from the machine and handed it to Aster. "How much time do we have left?" The matinee starts at 2, she said. "A half hour at most." "Plenty of time," her grandfather said, and unboxed the reel she had brought him. Once a month, Aster and her grandfather went to the Subalpine Cinema, where they only screened old movies. Aster liked that there were no computers or cell phones or people wearing shorts and sneakers in the movie. Instead, the actors wore fancy coats and hats and always had their hair done. When she couldn't find a movie very interesting, and she had run out of popcorn and milk duds, the red velvet seats were just comfortable enough for napping. "How does coq au vin sound for dinner?" Astor asked, flipping through the library's reference copy of the cookbook with the white cover and little orange fleur-de-lis and turquoise stars. Her grandfather glanced at her over the top of his glasses. "It's chicken, Grandpa," she explained, "and red wine. It has onions and bacon and mushrooms. Sounds good, right?" Her grandfather nodded, but she could tell he was concentrating on his microfilm reel. "What is this word?" she asked, pointing to the list of ingredients. "Do we have any at home?" Her grandfather glanced at the book. "Cognac. The G is silent, and the knack sounds like the Three Stooges laughing. Nyak, 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 nyak," her grandfather said. "I'm going to make a copy of the recipe," Astor said, shaking her head at her grandfather's joke. She carried the book to the photocopier, dropped 2 dimes in the coin slot, and watched the sheets of paper slide out of the machine. When she turned, she almost bumped into one of her neighbors. "Hey, Asteroid," Ken from 2 houses over said. He carried his football shoulder pads in one arm and a stack of books in the other. "How's it going?" "I'm good," Astor said, "but you look like you need help." "Nah, I got it," Ken assured her. "But thanks. Tell the professor I said hi." "I will," Astor said. The professor was what everyone in the neighborhood called her grandfather, not Mr. Douglas or Benjamin or Ben. Benjamin Douglas was the first black professor hired to teach at Sabal Palms University, and their community was proud that he was their own. Sometimes Astor called him Professor Grandpa because he was both her grandfather and her homeschool teacher. Soon he would be just be Grandpa though, since she would be starting 7th grade at the Hurston Middle School that fall. The thought of going to school made her stomach ache, like the time she ate a bad oyster sandwich at the county fair. The plan had always been for her to eventually go to a public school. Her mom thought she needed to have a real school experience with the other kids and other adults. And now that her grandpa was busy working on his book, A History of the Douglas Family, who were some of the earliest Bahamian settlers in Sabal Palms, it seemed like the perfect time. "Coca vin? Nice," Miss Falco said, interrupting her thoughts. "You have one lucky grandfather." "Tell that to him. I'm trying to expand his taste in food, Miss Falco," Astor said. "Grandpa could eat boxed macaroni and cheese every day, no problem." "I'm sure he appreciates your delicious cooking," Miss Falco said. "Oh, he does," Astor said, "but he thinks eating is just one more distraction from doing other things, like working." "Well, some people just don't have a passion for good food, like us," Miss Falco said, and winked. "I think eating is like," Astor thought for a second, "it's like looking at art in a museum, except better." "Art you can eat," Miss Falco said. "Want me to take that?" She held out her hands. Astor inhaled the smell of the cream-colored pages one more time before giving Miss Falco the book. Her desire for dinners that weren't microwaved in plastic trays and that didn't taste like cardboard had led her to the library's cookbook section, where she learned about cuisines from all over the world. But her favorite was the book dedicated to La Belle France. She loved everything about it: the list of measurement conversions, the line illustrations of the cutting techniques, the way the recipe names were all in French, and she had to look them up online to hear how they were pronounced. She folded the photocopies and filed them inside the vintage wooden DeSanti citrus recipe box she carried with her. It had been a promotional item that once contained recipes using DeSanti citrus products. She had found it at the flea market, emptied of its original contents. Now it kept her own ideas, as well as those she copied from cookbooks and magazines at the library. "It's time to go, Grandpa," she announced, adjusting her backpack. "A raisin in the sun awakes." "Yes, can't be late for Sydney," her grandfather said, putting the last microfilm reel back into its box. Astor grabbed the boxes and placed them in the return tray on Miss Falco's desk, while her grandfather stuffed his folder of papers into his satchel. "Did you know Sidney Poitier was the first black man to win an Oscar for Best Actor?" her grandpa asked. "I do now," Astor said, grinning. "Ready to go, Professor?" Her grandfather nodded, as they headed for the exit. "Goodbye, Mr. Douglas, Astor," the librarian called to them. "Goodbye, Miss Falco," Astor said with a wave before walking out into the humid afternoon with her grandfather. That's going to be all for today, and I hope this will get out soon. I don't know if it will get out before or after Valentine's Day, but I hope that whatever time it is, I hope you did or will have a good Valentine's Day. So, thank you and goodbye.